For the past few years on my channel, I've been doing this sort of informal series where I taste test authors who are new to me to try to get a feel for whether they're an author I should check out, I should follow, I should continue to read from, by reading a couple different books from different genres if they write in different genres, just to get a sense of their work. Because there are an absurd number of authors in the world, there's only so much time to read, and I hear some of the same names over and over again, and even if I were to pick up one of their books and read it, I don't necessarily get a truly strong sense of who that author is from a single example. And that's why I love this author taste test format, especially when I'm able to pick books of different genres or from different eras of an author's career. And eventually I started thinking, why am I just using this framework for authors? Why not try it for literary awards as well? Because if you're anything like me, you are in bookish spaces online, and every year you hear about the long lists, the short lists, the winners being announced for so many literary awards, you couldn't even follow them all if you tried. And I don't know about you, but that makes me feel overwhelmed every single year. Every year I think I should be following these, I should be keeping up with these, I should be reading all of these books. They're probably all incredible. And it's just too much. It's too much for one person to do. I decided, why not use this framework to figure out which of these literary awards I actually want to focus on, I actually want to come back to year after year after year. Instead of feeling constantly overwhelmed, I can just slowly work through the list of all the literary awards I want to check out and figure out one by one if they seem like they're aligned with my taste. Now, just like my author taste test videos are not me going out and reading every single book an author has ever written to have a definitive opinion about their oeuvre, my literary award taste tests are not going to involve me reading every single long-listed or short-listed book or every single winner for awards that have many, many, many categories. I have to keep things manageable for myself, but I am going to try to read enough that I can get a good sampling, a good spread of options to try to get an impression of what this award focuses on and what they value and what they are trying to highlight with their award. And of course, every award is different, and some awards have a different committee or a board deciding on the winners every single year. And so there are some literary awards that don't necessarily have one particular style that permeates through every single year. Sometimes the choices can vary wildly from year to year and from committee to committee, but I do think that each literary award has kind of its own archetype, its own style, its own ethos, and I want to slowly, over time, get a feeling for which awards align with my preferences, my tastes, which awards are worth following, and maybe following every single year and really becoming invested in and using as a chance to find new authors and new books that I might not have picked up otherwise that I might really love. Expand my understanding of this part of the literary world that I've never really dipped my toe in. So that is what I'm doing with this series, and this is the first video in the series, hence the slightly longer introduction and explanation so I could tell you how I even came to this idea. And to start us off, this first video in the series, I'm taste testing the Lambda Literary Awards. The Lambda Literary Awards, fondly known as the Lammys, were created in 1989 to garner national, as in American, national, visibility for LGBTQ books, which had established a foothold through a nascent network of lesbian and gay publishers and bookstores. Today, the Lammys celebrate more than 150 LGBTQ writers across 26 categories spanning a number of genres, lived identities, and experiences. They continue to proudly recognize works by self-published authors and independent and academic presses alongside works supported by traditional Big Five publishers. And they have a range of different categories focusing on different identities and different forms like nonfiction, fiction, poetry, memoir, etc. So no, I did not read every single winner, but I did try to get a good spread. I picked up 6 books. I unfortunately DNF'd one of the 6, so I did pick up an extra one as a replacement for that 6th book, so I did still finish 6 of the winners, and I'm excited to talk through all of them and review them for you, and then give you my verdict at the end of whether I think I will continue to follow the Lammys in the future. But the books I was reading were from the 2025 awards, so last year's awards, just for clarity's sake. And yes, I did initially plan on posting this video during Pride Month, but better late than never, I always say. The first category I'm going to talk about is lesbian fiction, and the winner was The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. If this is not your first video here, you've probably heard me talk about this book this summer because I think I have now mentioned it in at least 4 videos, 2 of which are basically dedicated videos, just singing the praises of this book. So if you're new here, hi, my name's Elizabeth and I love The Safekeep, and I'm about to talk about it for several minutes. And if you're not new here, I'm sorry, I still love The Safekeep and I'm going to talk about it for several minutes. Gotta take the opportunities whenever they arise. So basically, this is historical fiction. It's set in the Netherlands in the 1960s. And while there is a significant romance plot to it, I would never describe this as a romance, nor would I describe it as historical romance. It is historical fiction, literary fiction, more so than it is romance, despite the romance being prominent, just to set expectations somewhat. But in this story, we're following our protagonist, Isabel, who lives in her family home in the Netherlands, and she currently lives there alone. She has a maid who comes in most days of the week to help out, and she's essentially a caretaker for this home because the plan has always been that her elder brother, eventually when he gets married and is ready for a family to settle down, that he will take over the family home and raise his family there, at which point Isabel would likely be asked to leave. But in the meantime, while he's out building his career and living his bachelor life, and same with her other brother, she is at home and she is taking over the role that her mother used to hold of caring for the home, being a homemaker, despite being young and single herself. And this story has so many layers to it. It is so beautifully written. The prose is just stunning. I could go on and on about how gorgeous this book is, but the best thing about it is its characterization. It is such a deep character study of Isabel and of her sheltered life and her finally opening her eyes to parts of herself she had never seen, her coming to terms with her own queer identity, falling in love for the first time, and reckoning with what her life has been and how she has lived her life up to this point and what she wants her life to be moving forward. But it also explores a very specific time period in the Netherlands post-World War II. It explores so many themes of legacy and ownership and stewardship, possession, belonging, family, vulnerability, honesty, love. And it's just such a perfect combination of palpable atmosphere and gorgeous character work and really vulnerable, uncomfortable scenes where characters are being so human and raw and honest that you almost feel like you shouldn't be there witnessing these conversations or these interactions. It is so immediate and intense and immersive, and it has this incredibly palpable, oppressive summer heat atmosphere, which is why I brought it up in my Atmospheric Summer Reads recommendations video. The historical context adds so much. The thematic exploration is so complex and layered. The characterization, like I said, the relationship development, the sexual tension is just the best I have ever read. The layers upon layers here are impeccable and beautiful, and I just felt so moved reading it and have continued to think about it literally every day since I finished it. So all that to say, I 100% understand why this won the lesbian category for the Lammys. How could it not? What an incredible book. I would highly, highly recommend it. And if it's not incredibly clear from that review, I gave this 5 stars. It's probably the best book I have read this year, point blank. So that's the Safekeep. Because this book also won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2025, I did a dedicated reading vlog for it because I knew I was going to be including it in 2 separate award taste test videos. So definitely check out that reading vlog if you want many, many, many more thoughts, spoiler sections to get into the nitty gritty, which you can skip over very easily if you so choose, but you can watch if you've read the book. Please go read it and then come back and tell me how great it was. So many of you have done that already, and I love it. I'm making it my mission to force more people to read this book and to love it as much as I do. It's great. This was the first book I read for this taste test, and it certainly set me up to expect great things about how this would go. Then the next category was gay fiction, and the winner in 2025 was Henry Henry by Alan Bratton. And this is set in 2014 in London, in England, and it's meant to be a contemporary retelling of the Henriade by William Shakespeare. As a Shakespeare lover, that intrigued me, certainly. However, unfortunately, this is the one that I DNF'd. You can see I read the first couple chapters. I did read a couple more chapters after this point. I will say that I very quickly, from the first chapter, was struggling with the tone of this one. I just was not in the right place to appreciate it, and perhaps never will be. Maybe it's just not for me. It does remind me in places of authors like Otessa Moshfegh, who I've had sort of mixed reactions to depending on the book, but there is this tendency to lean into the grossness, the vulgarity of the human body, of bodily functions, leaning into the ennui and the dreariness of existence, and really a quite depressing tone with dark humor that doesn't always work for me depending on the subject matter. And because my mental health wasn't the best in the last couple of months and I was really struggling with grief, I was just having a really hard time reading this. Every time I picked it up and tried to read it, I just felt so weighed down emotionally and felt myself closing in on myself. I just started to realize that it wasn't worth it to me to finish the book and to maybe put myself in a severe reading slump or just to be in an even worse place with my mental health for who knows how long. The content that is in here, even just in the first number of chapters that I read, I think I got to chapter 12 or so, or 13. The content was already really difficult content, very dark content that really should have content warnings front and center and clear before people pick up a book, in my opinion. And while I do read a lot of books that cover content like the content in this book, it's not the first time or the last time, I'm sure, that I will pick up a book exploring these kinds of themes and ideas. Whatever it was, the combination of this protagonist and this writing style and the tone and the way that these ideas were being explored and how visceral they were and how much we were forced to live them in the moment was just, I was really, really struggling with it. I was having a terrible time, to be honest. And I wasn't feeling like the writing style was clicking or the characterization was clicking. I wasn't feeling any impulse to continue reading. And so I ended up deciding to DNF. Not every book is for everyone. And maybe someday I'll come back to this and give it another try. And maybe I won't. Either way, I think there are lots of other people in the world who will like this a lot better than I did. I mean, there's evidence in the reviews and ratings that there are a lot of people who got a lot out of this, and I am genuinely glad that they did. Presumably the Lammys had good reason to award this book and to feel that it deserved being recognized. It just was not something that I felt I could read right now, or maybe ever. And that doesn't happen to me that often. If you've been here for a while, you know I don't DNF readily. I also read a lot of pretty depressing books. Most of my favorite books of the year every year are books that I would describe as devastating or explore really difficult subject matter. So it's certainly not unusual for me. I just unfortunately could not do it right now. So this was my one DNF. However, because I DNF'd this book and I wanted to pick up a replacement, I did end up reading another amazing 5-star read. I will save that to the end because that was my bonus read, but it ended up being a great thing actually in some ways, that this book that I bounced off, Henry, because it did encourage me to pick up a 7th book, and that book I really, really loved. But I'll save that for the end. Let's move on to bisexual fiction, and the winner was How to Fall in Love in a Time of Unnameable Disaster by Muriel, Leung. And this was a very, very strange book. I have to say that to start off. My understanding is that this started as a collection of short stories, and you can kind of feel that in the structure of it. You can sort of feel the genesis of the story from a short story collection. And in some ways that did make it feel a little bit more disconnected, a little less like it had a consistent through line for me. And that was one of the sticking points for me. I will also say that while I love weird experimental fiction, while I love speculative fiction, while I love surreal fiction, I do typically enjoy a certain level of groundedness, or at the very least, some sort of even very vague explanation for how and why things are happening. I think just because I read a lot of speculative fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, I like there being some sort of structure so that I can follow it and I understand what's coming, instead of literally anything that you could think of being possible at any time and not really understanding the mechanics at all. Again, it doesn't have to explain every single thing. It doesn't have to have a logical reason for things to exist, but I do like there to be at least some in-universe passing sentence sort of explaining why things are the way they are. That's just how my brain works, I guess. And I did feel like while many of these chapters, if they had been an individual short story, I maybe would have just thrown caution to the wind and said, sure, it's weird, but sure, I can enjoy it. When it was all strung together in one long novel and there were so many things that I did not understand why and how they were happening and what the purpose was for the weirdness, I did start to get a little weirdness fatigue, a little surrealism fatigue. And it's not that everything that's weird or odd or unusual has to have a concrete reason and the text has to say, this is why this character has no head but is still alive, right? But I did wonder why the character had no head and was alive, because it is set in the real world. Obviously, things are different than the real world. I should give you the premise. This is set in a post-apocalyptic, or in the midst of the apocalypse happening world in New York City, and acid rain has started following every Tuesday on the dot, and the acid rain is destroying destroying buildings, destroying infrastructure, and also killing people who are caught out in the rain. A lot of people are dying, but even people who died prior to the acid rain starting are coming back as ghosts. So people are living with ghosts, they're seeing ghosts, but there's also more unexplained things like cockroaches who do drugs and party and also can come back as ghosts, or people who, again, can lose their head because of acid rain and then be headless but not be dead somehow. There was a disconnect for me in wondering what the purpose was. There was no, at least to me, no particularly clear reason for there to be a cockroach as a character. I'm not opposed to the idea of a ghost cockroach character. I actually would say that the ghost cockroach was my favorite character in this book. But why? I don't know. I don't know why it was happening. I don't necessarily need to know, but I didn't feel like, again, maybe in part because of the structure of almost feeling like many short stories put together, there wasn't enough there for me thematically, enough of an underpinning for me to start to infer why the author might have been exploring the ideas she wanted to explore in these particular ways, through these particular surreal elements. While I did like the weirdness, I did like several of the characters, I found the melancholic feeling that permeated everything to be quite intoxicating. I enjoyed several moments. I was touched at various moments. I got emotional at moments and was connected to several of the characters. I ultimately, especially with the way the book ended, just kind of felt like it never coalesced. It never came together in the way that I hoped for. And again, it really did feel like that genesis, that originating as several short stories, never quite was ironed out of the work. And I almost think I would have preferred it if it had continued to exist as a collection of stories instead of one continuous novel. I think each of the individual chapters or sections had an actual quite touching or compelling or satisfying conclusion, but as an entire novel, there really wasn't anything to tie it together or to feel like there was the sense of finality and of thematic weight for me personally. So even though I really enjoyed many aspects of this, I enjoyed the process of reading it. I thought it was interesting. I would definitely pick up more of this author's work and just see what is going on in her brain, because seems weird. Love that. This book for me was not a total slam dunk. So I ended up sitting at 3 stars for How to Fall in Love in a Time of Unnameable Disaster. And our protagonist in this book is bisexual, has just left her girlfriend to come back home to live with her mother because the acid rain is getting worse and she feels like she needs to go home. She begs her girlfriend to come with her, but her girlfriend is unwilling to come. And for much of the beginning of the novel, she is processing the grief that comes with not knowing if her girlfriend is still alive and is okay. And we also watch her develop a relationship later on with a man. And that relationship was underdeveloped for me, and the way it ended was quite abrupt. And I think a lot of the ideas that came up as part of that and a lot of the backstory for that character were really not explored to the depth that I would personally want to see. It just kind of felt like a loose thread at the end there. So next up is the winner of the Transgender Fiction category, and the winner was Firebugs by Nino Bulling, and this is a graphic novel. And this one was very hard to get my hands on. I finally found a copy, but I'm glad I did find it because I really enjoyed this. And in this graphic novel, we're following Inkin, who is coming to terms with realizing that their gender identity might be more complex than they initially thought, and trying to figure out what that means. Do they want to transition medically? Do they want to transition socially? Do they want to change their name? Do they want to change their pronouns? How do they want to move forward? What are they comfortable with? What pace do they want to move at? All of those questions they are asking and working through. And there's this simultaneous through line of climate anxiety and climate change and the world burning, and an ongoing metaphor of whether it is required to essentially burn your entire life and start fresh in the ashes when you decide to transition, or are you able to hold on to parts of yourself, parts of your life, relationships in your life, certain aspects of your life, and just metamorphose into a new version of yourself. And I thought that that was a really beautiful metaphor, a really lovely connection. And I thought that the climate anxiety aspect of this really tied in quite well to this gender exploration. I also thought that a graphic novel was such a great format for this. I am starting to really become a huge fan of graphic novels as a medium. I think art can communicate so much, and I really got a lot from this art style and the facial expressions. And I also really loved the choice to have it all be black and white and red, and the selective occasional choice to use much more red than typical. For the most part, red is just separating the different frames and for the text, and all of the art is in black and white, but there are a couple frames where there is significantly more red on the page. And I thought that that was incredibly effective when it came up. I just think that this was a really lovely exploration of one specific person. I mean, it's not setting out to be the story of every trans person, every person's experience with realizing that they are trans and what that means for them. This is Inken's experience and only Inken's experience. But it is vulnerable and it's beautiful and it's raw and it's honest and it's complicated and it's painful at times, a lot of the time, and it's a rebirth. And I don't think anyone would describe birth in any sense of the word as a peaceful, painless process. But I thought that there was a lot of hope and a lot of potential for Inken to find a way forward and to find peace. I think there is a sense of hope there that I really appreciated, while also not running away from the difficulty and the pain and the discomfort and the loss that can come with such a big revelation, such a big change. I thought it was really beautifully done. The only thing I would critique, if I were to critique literally anything, is that there is a character who I really didn't like. I don't think you're supposed to like her, but I really didn't like her, and I occasionally felt the need to punch her through the page. Also, the ending was very abrupt. And on the one hand, I think the abruptness works thematically for where we were at in the story and where Inken is and the decision that is about to be made and how Inken wants to move forward. And I do think it makes sense within the narrative. I think it's effective to leave the reader at that point in the story, but it was so abrupt. And I think because I'd grown really attached to Inken and I wanted to watch the metamorphosis, the full transformation into a butterfly, I really wanted to get at least a little bit more past that point, and I wanted to see a little bit more gender euphoria and joy maybe that wasn't there at the end because of where it cut off and how suddenly it cut off. And again, I think it makes sense structurally. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the ending. I actually think it's very effective. I just personally wanted a little more, and it was so abrupt that I did at first wonder if there was meant to be a part 2 maybe that I was missing, or if I got an incomplete version or something. And at first that really bugged me. If you follow me, if you've watched my reviews for a while, you know I can be persnickety about abrupt endings. They annoy me. But sitting with it a little bit longer, thinking about it more, I really do think it was incredibly effective. And even though I selfishly wanted more and wanted to see Inken happy and settled, I think it makes sense. And I think in terms of a literary device, it was effective. And so I am begrudgingly saying that I actually think it was a good choice, even if it makes me sad selfishly that I didn't get more. I'm giving Firebugs 5 stars. I thought this was very, very well done, and I would love to read more from Nino Boleyn. And I'm glad that I scoured the internet for a copy because it was really nice to read a physical copy, even though it was very hard to find. Next up, I picked up the winner in the Bisexual Nonfiction category, which ended up being a memoir, You're Embarrassing Yourself by Desiree Akhavan. And I did not know Desiree Akhavan before reading this. This happens to me so much with memoirs. I'll pick up a memoir of a famous person and I've never heard of them before or seen anything they're in. I spend my whole life reading, so I don't watch a lot of movies or TV shows, and then I end up missing people who are apparently very famous who I've never heard of. And that was the case here. However, I really enjoyed reading this memoir, even if I had no idea who Desiree was before I picked it up. This is very much a coming-of-age memoir. It covers Desiree's experience from childhood, sort of preteen-ish age, through her teenage years, young adulthood, into her slightly older young adulthood, and all of the different seasons of her life and experiences, and really coming to terms with her own identity, both as a bisexual woman, but also as a woman of color who is visible on the world stage as a public figure, as an actor, as a filmmaker, and really sort of figuring out her path and what she wants out of the world and her relationships, both platonic and sexual and romantic, trying to figure out where she fits in the world and how she can sort of carve a path for herself as herself in the full complexity of her humanity, and maybe showing up in a way that is not typically what Hollywood might expect, for example. And this had a lot of humor to it. It was quite enjoyable to read. Desiree is definitely a character, so it was quite interesting to follow her experience. Again, I'm not a big memoir reader, but I did really feel like there was a lot of vulnerability and honesty here. I felt like a memoir does its job when it feels like you are getting a window into someone's life in a way that is, you know, a little bit more intimate than you would normally get into the life of a stranger, and that you're able to, you know, see all the many ways that we share experiences, but also see the plethora of different lived experiences and understand where other people are coming from. And I just appreciate when someone writing a memoir is willing to make themselves look like the villain sometimes, because we're all the villain sometimes in somebody's story. We're all messy and make mistakes, and we're all human. And I think a memoir that is too polished and too much of a PR project can really zap any value out of a memoir. It starts to feel like, what is the point of this? Because there is no true humanity and vulnerability and honesty here. And this memoir was nothing if not vulnerable and honest. I also think that Desiree has a lot of reflection. She really looks back on these moments of her life and considers how she contributed to some of these dynamics and was not always the best friend or the best partner. And I really appreciate that, because I also feel that I often bump into an issue with memoirs where I feel like there's a lack of introspection and reflection, which feels wild when you're talking about a memoir, because what else is a memoir other than someone literally sitting down and reflecting on their life and introspecting? But somehow a lot of memoirs are published and they have a marked lack of introspection. Again, this is not lacking on the introspection side. I will say that while I really enjoyed it, I thought it was candid, I thought it was funny at times, I thought it was heartfelt, it definitely wasn't the most moving or impactful memoir I've ever read. I, wouldn't say that I would run around screaming from the rooftops that everyone has to read it. And again, I'm sure in part that is just, I'm not a big memoir person. So I think it takes a lot for a memoir to really become a favorite, despite the genre, despite it being a memoir. And I don't know why memoirs don't typically blow me away, despite being a very character-driven reader, but they just, I don't know, they just don't usually. So even though this was really great, I really enjoyed reading it. I'm glad I picked it up. I am not giving it 5 stars because there was just that something, that je ne sais quoi, that was not quite there for me to fully take it into the next realm of a memoir that I will continue to think about and reflect on and learn from and grow from moving forward, My most common critique of memoirs, maybe if Desiree had waited until she was 80 to write this, it would have had that last little je ne sais quoi, but who knows. So anyway, I'm glad that I picked this up, even if it wasn't totally life-changing or anything. I think it's worth reading, especially if you're a fan of memoirs and you're wanting to read more memoirs and expand your palette of memoirs. And I ended up giving You're Embarrassing Yourself 4 stars. And the last book that I had initially picked up and planned on reading for this video, but second last, since like I said, I ended up picking up a book virtually as an ebook to replace my DNF. But the last official category I was initially planning on reading from was the Transgender Nonfiction category, which again ended up being yet another memoir, Pretty by K.B. Brookins. And this really, again, follows a similar time period of KB's life from childhood, pretty young childhood, through adolescence and young adulthood into slightly older young adulthood, and all of the complexities that come with existing in the world at an intersection of multiple marginalizations. And for KB, as a Black non-binary person, there are a lot of layers here. There's a lot of complexity to KB's experience. And this was really interesting because it was not as much a typical memoir as a bit of a mixed media project. There were poems, there were lists, there were more traditional chapters, and I found that really interesting. Again, as much as I am not typically someone who reads a lot of memoirs and not someone who reads a lot of poetry either, I did appreciate it. I did really enjoy KB's poetry and was glad that it was included in here. And I also just found it to be a really effective memoir. I was able to walk with KB through their memories of their life for a short time, and I felt very privileged to be able to do so. I felt like I really appreciated KB's vulnerability in sharing their story and being willing to talk about some of the really, really hard parts of their life, and not just the parts, again, kind of like with You're Embarrassing Yourself, not just pointing out the times where other people maybe were the villain in their story, but the times when they were the villain in someone else's story. And I do think that that is the kind of reflection and introspection that I hope for in reading a memoir. And I just personally felt that Pretty took it to that next level, had that extra bit of je ne sais quoi of really connecting emotionally. I will say I sobbed a couple times reading this, especially in the sections around KB trying to find their birth father specifically and their complicated relationship with their adopted father. Again, in part because I lost my dad last year, and I picked this up pretty close to the first anniversary of my dad's death. And so I was already feeling pretty emotional on that track, thinking about relationships with fathers, and it just devastated me. There was so much vulnerability and honesty and rawness in that depiction of that relationship and the yearning and the hope and the connection and, you know, a hope for more openness and more acceptance and support moving forward. It was just quite devastating to read, and that got to me on a really deep emotional level, but also several other moments and experiences that KB went through I found very emotionally affecting. And I just really appreciated the complexity, the intersection of experiences, diving into really complicated topics of transness and masculinity and Blackness, gender presentation, family, belonging, and how other people's perceptions of you alter the ways that you are able to move through the world and alter your own perception and understanding of yourself in sometimes a really fundamental way that can be very hard to break out of. KB did a lot of interrogating and exploring Black masculinity specifically, and the ways that Black masculinity impacted KB through every phase of their life. I think it was explored very extensively to a deeper level than I would typically expect from a memoir, and I really appreciated that. I found it really fascinating, such an interesting discussion to have, and a very complex one. And I think for all those reasons, this one ended up having a little bit more of that je ne sais quoi. And for me, this was a 5-star experience. So I gave Pretty 5 stars. And that brings us to the final book that I read for this video. Like I said, because I DNF'd Henry, I really wanted to pick up something to replace it. And I did want to pick up something written by a gay author focusing on a gay experience because it was the gay fiction winner that I had DNF'd. And in looking through the options, I came across the gay romance category. And at first I was hesitant because if you know me, you know that I don't read a lot of romance. I'm not really much of a romance reader, but I will say that when I love romance, it is typically queer romance of some kind. So I ended up deciding to give it a go and just see, in part because some of the other nonfiction options written by gay authors were extremely long and also hard to get my hands on. So I decided to give it a go, and I read The Spring Before Obergefell, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, by Ben Grossberg. And I'm so glad I picked this up. I'm so glad I read this. This is a romance between two gay men in their 50s living in a small rural town in America, the spring before the Obergefell decision that gay marriage became legal in 2016 in the US. And my heart... Oh my God. I immediately fell in love with our protagonist. He's just a dude in his 50s living with his dad who has moved in as an elderly man after his wife passed, becoming a widower, and he's just working his multiple jobs. He's grading papers. He works at the local, I think it's the community college, and he works at a hardware store part-time, and he's, you know, going on dates and hooking up and never had a long-term relationship, and kind of feels for multiple reasons that might not be his path, that he might never find his soulmate. And his dad is more on the Republican side, but he is still pretty supportive of his son. He knows his son is gay. He wants his son to find a partner and to be happy and to settle down and get married. And through this story, not only does our protagonist meet two different guys that he connects to on a deeper level and start to maybe feel like there's a chance that he could find love, and one of them is someone that he ends up feeling like he could see his life with, and it's a very complicated thing for both him and for this other guy to work through and process, because both of them have not expected to find that again or ever in their lives. And they're scared to open up and to be hurt, but they also don't see how they could really build the kind of life that they want, because gay marriage still isn't legal and they live in this town that is more on the conservative side. And even though both of them have acceptance within their own small circle, it's, you know, there's still so much complexity to that dynamic, and to moving from casually seeing someone and more hookup culture into maybe a more serious relationship and romance. And he also ends up becoming really good friends with this other guy that he starts dating around the same time, and their friendship was just so heartwarming. I loved them so much. I was so glad they ended up friends, and I just loved them so much together. I thought this other guy was amazing and loved how he supported our protagonist Mike, but there was just something so deeply heartwarming about watching Mike fall in love really for the first time, properly fall in love, and to fight for it, and to try to convince a fellow man in his 50s who is scared to open up and to try to have a relationship and doesn't necessarily believe that he can have that, that it's worth trying and that they really should. And there were moments that were definitely very like rom-com-y and almost silly. There were moments that were, there were spicy moments on the page. There were really sweet romantic moments. I just read most of it with a big grin on my face, I'm not gonna lie, and I was crying through the entire ending. It's also the way, sorry, this is a mess. I'm all over the place. I loved this book. Also, the way that this book explores Mike's relationship with his dad was so layered and complex and heartbreaking, but also sweet and endearing at the same time. The complexity there was really beautifully done, and I really could relate to some aspects of his relationship with his dad, even if in so many ways our scenarios are polar opposites, but there was such a core of humanity there and so relatable in moments and some of their interactions and the ways that their relationship changed from father and son when Mike was a child to their adult relationship. We also watched his dad maybe try opening up his heart again after losing his wife and thinking he would never ever be with another woman ever again, and maybe realize that he could try and maybe his wife would have wanted that, and maybe he's allowed to want that, which also was heartwarming for me. But it was really Mike, his romance story and his journey and his realization that he was falling in love, and then his panic and how do I even begin to approach this? How do I tell someone that I am interested in them like this, that I really want to be with them? And what do I do if they're also afraid and they run away? I just thought it was so heartwarming and endearing. The ending of this and the epilogue had me sobbing happy tears. I ended up reading a bunch of it to my husband. I made my husband sit on the couch and I read it to him through my tears because I could both relate so much to some of the quotes near the end about love and about partnership and commitment. But it also was just so sweet and lovely that I had to share it, and I had big feelings about it. So anyway, as I start to cry talking about it, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to say too much. I loved this so much. I gave it 5 stars. In case you couldn't tell, would highly recommend. I'm so glad I picked it up. Again, I was so disappointed, and I tried many times to pick Henry back up and to push through because I wanted to read it for this video. But at the end of the day, I think it was the right choice to DNF that one. It opened space for me to choose something else, and I'm so glad that I picked up The Spring Before Obergefell because it was just so lovely. And it's now being added to my list of one of my favorite romance novels I've ever read. So yay. And on that happy note, that brings us to the end of all the books that I read for the Lammys, to taste test the Lammys from the 2025 winners. And as you can see, I think it went pretty well. I mean, we had 4 5-star reads, a 4-star read, a 3-star read, and 1 DNF. I don't know what the average of that is. Future me will calculate it hopefully correctly and put it on the screen. I have made math mistakes before and been shamed publicly, so hopefully I don't mess it up this time. But even if the average rating isn't as good as I think it probably is, I assume it's somewhere in the 4-star range, which is pretty great for me because I can be critical. I can be tough in my ratings. I really enjoyed this experience. Even Henry, which ultimately wasn't for me, or at least in this period of my life, I found it interesting. I was introduced to so many authors I had never tried and never heard of before. I don't think I'd actually ever heard of any of these authors before or seen any of their work. So suddenly my horizons have been expanded, even as someone who reads a lot of queer literature, and I really do read a lot. All of these authors were new to me. All of these books were new to me, and I had so many great experiences and found so many new favorites. So as you might be able to tell, I really feel like this was such a successful taste test, and I definitely want to continue following the Lammys moving forward. I already have plans to hopefully read a similar number, if not maybe more, of the winners from the 2026 winners, and then to be able to take maybe a whole year, more like a whole year to get through them, and then do a similar video next year, closer to the time that the 2027 winners will be announced, sharing my reviews and talking about the winners and whether I enjoyed them or not. But I just feel like this was such a great experience. I'm so happy I did it, and this makes me very excited to do this challenge or this series moving forward. So please let me know in the comments down below if you are thinking you might check out any of the books that I read for this video, if you're adding any of them to your TBR, or if you're going to check out the Lammys if you weren't already familiar. I would love to know if there are any other winners on the list of 26 winners from 2025 that I should read. There are several of them already on my TBR that I am planning on reading at some point if I can manage it, if I can find the time. And again, I am hoping to read several of the 2026 winners as well. I will link down below their website, both the 2025 winners page, so you can see descriptions of all the winners that I read for this video, but also see all the other winners and the other categories. But I'll also link the 2026 winners in case you want to see who won this year. And I just really enjoyed exploring these winners and reading them, and I am very grateful that the Lammys exist. I love the idea of continuing to advocate for and champion and promote queer literature. We need more queer lit in the world of all kinds. That representation, I'm gonna get emotional, that representation matters. And I, as a little bisexual bookworm growing up in the 90s and 2000s, I did not see myself represented in books ever. And it really warms my heart so much to know that other queer kids growing up now can see themselves represented, and that I can see representation. I can find that in books that I read now as an adult and work on healing my inner child, but also that the kids growing up now have something that I didn't get to have. And how beautiful is that? How beautiful is that? Even if you're not queer, you should be reading queer lit. But I had such an amazing time with this. I'm so glad I did it. This was a win. Check for the Lambda Awards, adding those to my ongoing rotation. And again, it makes me so excited to continue with this journey moving forward, this series, and to try more literary awards and find if they fit with my taste and are worth following. But I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a little long. The sun went down while I was talking, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these or any of the other winners. Let me know if you're planning on picking up any of the 2026 winners and which literary awards you want to see me check out next. And I think that's it. I think that's it. I'm really glad I did this. I'm feeling giddy, and I'll see you really soon. Thank you for watching. Leave an emoji down below that represents one of the books I talked about in this video, and I'll try to guess which book your emoji represents. Once again, I am kind of terrible at this game, but I do enjoy it, so indulge me, please. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and hype this video up if you're on mobile so more people can join our little bookish family here on the internet. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.